is a nightmare. Man, that's the way it seems. Life is a nightmare.
Welcome to Today in Horrible History, your daily dose of historical misfortune. For today, February 14th, 2022, we head back to February 14th of 1929, and there is really only one obvious horrible history event for this date that we should start off with, this being the first Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day for horrible history. That is, of course, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, one of the most infamous unsolved crimes in American history. It's important to note that the United States, along with most other Western countries, decided to experiment with prohibition. That is to say, the illegality of producing or selling alcohol. This is an experiment which started in 1919, at least in the United States, and you could check out the Volstead Act and the related amendments, both establishing and repealing prohibition. It lasted a good 15 years or so in the United States when it was illegal to produce, transport, sell alcohol. And what this did, of course, was create an enormous underground market for alcohol, which, of course, was immediately controlled by organized crime, which is generally what happens when you prohibit something. And in the case of Chicago, one of the biggest centers for organized crime in the country, one of the largest cities in the country then as now, there were some very famous gangsters. There was a gang run by George Moran, known by the nickname Bugs Moran, who is one of your typical all-time gangsters, and a rival of his was Al Capone, the original Scarface, Al Scarface Capone. And they ran rival gangs who both wanted to be in charge not only of the other illegal drugs and prostitution and gambling in Chicago and in that region of the country, but they also both were rivals in terms of alcohol. Bootlegging, it was called, the sale and movement of illegal alcohol. A lot of it came in through Canada. A lot of the alcohol in the Chicago area actually came in via Detroit, which is right on the Canadian border. So working with some gangs in the Detroit area who were importing Canadian alcohol, which at the time was legal in Canada, they were getting shipments into Chicago and would distribute it, mark it up, of course, and make money, just like any drug dealer would operate now. In any event, the Moran and Capone gangs hated each other, tried to murder each other, had drive-by shootings with machine guns out the window of their late model 1920s cars, trying to murder each other. Drive-bys didn't start yesterday, kids. They've been with us for a century. And this culminated in probably one of the most famous crimes, definitely one of the most famous crimes in American history. On Valentine's Day of 1929, there was a shipment of whiskey from Detroit, which the Bugs Moran gang had at their headquarters for their bootlegging operations, a garage at 2122 North Clark Street in Chicago. 6 of the direct gang members and their mechanic, who obviously was basically in on things because he knew what happened at the garage, were barged in on by 4 men. 2 of those men were wearing Chicago police officer uniforms. 2 of them were plainclothes. And they had the 7 men stand up against the wall, you would assume, as if they were going to be frisked and cuffed and taken in for questioning, when what happened, in fact, was they were stood up against the wall and then gunned down mercilessly. 2 of the men were carrying Thompson submachine guns, a.k.a. Tommy guns. That is the stereotypical weapon that you would see in old-timey gangster movies. One of those had a 20-round drum. The other one had a 50-round drum. And they really blew these guys away. The other 2 fellows were carrying shotguns and finished off a couple of the men with that. Actually, two of them, they said that their faces were basically blown off of their heads. One of the men actually survived the shooting when police officers came on the scene and questioned him as he was dying. There was one surviving member of the Moran gang who, to the end, kept to his snitches get stitches ethos, and wouldn't rat anybody out. And his last words apparently were, "Nobody shot me," which is ridiculous because he was riddled with bullet holes. He died. All 7 men were dead. We know what happened generally only because Bugs Moran himself was a few minutes late to the meeting for the sale of the whiskey, and he saw what he thought were police officers entering the warehouse, so he went to a nearby cafe and thought he'd wait things out and let his Confederates get arrested and then sort of come back later and see how things were going. So he is the witness for the fact that there were 2 men in police uniforms and 2 men without. There may have been a couple of other witnesses for this as well. And to this day, we don't know if those 2 men were actually Chicago police officers or not. There were some crooked police who were stealing some bootleg whiskey from the Moran gang and other gangs and had been disciplined for it before. There was talk of retaliation for the death of a policeman's son. But it's also equally possible that this was either in conjunction with or entirely the work of Al Capone's gang, who may have just dressed in a couple of Chicago police uniforms in order to get the Moran gang to let their guard down. We will never know. The event basically led to the undoing of both Moran and Capone in different ways. Their gangs both kind of spiraled downhill. Moran lost a lot of his best guys and a bunch of money and territory to Capone, and ended up being kind of a broke, small-time crook who eventually died in Leavenworth Federal Prison, died of cancer in 1957 after doing long prison runs he just kept trying to rob banks and other establishments whenever he'd be let out of prison. Capone ended up really getting federal authorities and other authorities looking more closely at his considerable wealth and illegal business dealings because of the notoriety, the just front page headlines of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And it became harder for him to operate without getting arrested. He was busted in Philadelphia for carrying a concealed weapon when he was changing trains. Spent 9 months in Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. He was busted, I believe, in Miami for some small charge. And then the big deal was that the federal government got Capone for tax evasion eventually, because he had tens of millions, perhaps $100 million, which was an enormous amount of money at the time, an unimaginable amount of money at that time, and was not paying taxes on it, or at least was not paying them properly, and was hit on tax evasion charges, spent a long time in federal prison, and was only released when his neurosyphilis caught up with him, and he kind of died somewhat quietly and not with every marble intact at his home in Florida. So there's your happy Valentine's Day story, or as a lot of Americans say these days, Valentimes. And I hope you have a better day. A reminder to please like and subscribe to Today in Horrible History, where after a brief visit, the rest of your day could only seem better by comparison.
Life is a nightmare, man, that's the way it seems. Life is a nightmare.